What Women Want movie review. So if you don't remember this movie, this came out in 2000. It stars Mel Gibson and Helen Hunt, and it's basically a romantic comedy, but it's got a little bit of a fantastical twist on it. Mel Gibson in this movie can hear the thoughts of women. So, like he can read the thoughts that are going on in their minds. I'm going to date myself once again. I was in college when this movie came out in 2000, and I remember seeing previews for it everywhere. For whatever reason, the commercials for this movie just seemed to be everywhere. In the theaters, on TV, there was a real marketing blitz behind this film. And I remember seeing all the commercials for this movie and thinking, that looks terrible. I mean, the commercials just made it look really stupid. The jokes were not funny and way too obvious. And then sure enough, when it hit theaters, it got pretty terrible reviews. There was no Rotten Tomatoes back then, so I don't know what the aggregate was nationwide. But certainly in my local newspapers, the reviews I picked up really slammed this movie. And so I thought, yeah, okay, no need to ever see this one. And then I saw it. Well, the reason I saw it is the reason why probably most men end up seeing this movie. I was doing movie night with a friend, and she wanted to see it, and so I agreed to sit through it. So the good news is this movie is not nearly as bad as I thought it was going to be. Based on the previews, I thought this was going to be absolutely awful, but it's not great, but it's not as terrible as I thought it was going to be. It had its moments. I was laughing out loud at several points. There were some points where I felt Mel Gibson's manic reactions were bordering on overacting. But for the most part, I thought the actors in this movie, Mel Gibson included, had pretty great comic timing. And it made for a pretty funny movie. Now, the premise of being able to hear what's going on in other people's heads is one of those tropes. It's, popped up in like a million sitcoms and old TV movies and old movies and stuff like that. I think my first exposure to it was an old Disney movie called The Misadventures of Merlin Jones, which came out way back in the 60s, but was being rerun on the Disney Channel in the 1980s when I was growing up. And so having seen that movie already, or having seen this trope already, it wasn't... once you've seen it done a few times, your patience is a little bit lower, or you're less impressed. So I was like, all right, another movie where somebody can read people's minds. But there's a first time for everyone. So someone out there was seeing this movie, and this was the first time they saw that trope about a character who could read other people's minds. So your mileage will probably vary on this movie depending on how overly familiar you are with this being done in movies before. Now, usually when you see this done in movies or TV shows, there's some sort of an attempt to give a reasonable explanation about why this is happening. For example, in that Misadventures of Merlin Jones movie I just referenced previously, he was wearing this helmet that he was using to study the electromagnetic brain waves, and then there was some sort of problem. The helmet gave him, there was a scientific experiment going on that went wrong, which gave him the ability to read people's minds. I know that's not much, but it's at least the writer saying, okay, look, we're going to give you something. You just have to imagine there's a scientific experiment going on. This movie, What Women Want, gives you absolutely nothing. I mean, Mel Gibson is in the shower. He's in the bathtub. He gets an electric shock in the bathtub. And that's it. That's all the explanation you get. So why does this electric shock let him hear people's thoughts? Why does it only let him hear women's thoughts and not the thoughts of men? None of that is explained. They don't even attempt to explain it. Now, to a certain extent, this is fair enough because nobody really cares how he got the powers. in a movie like this. In a movie like this, they're just like, okay, just imagine he has these powers. What would be the comic possibilities that result from that? And I guess that's fair enough. I don't know, it's really lazy writing, but okay, whatever, we'll give it a pass. The other problem I have with this movie is the ending. Now, I've got a very limited patience for sap in movies, and yeah, the sappy part in this movie is really sappy. There's a very sappy ending scene with just this saccharine orchestra music playing as Mel Gibson makes his big romantic speech. That part was awful. But you know, that part, I don't know. When I was in college, I remember these romantic comedy movies, the ones that were big in the 90s, were on all the time. You know, you were in the dorm rooms, you're at somebody's apartment, and these always seemed to be on, especially when there were girls around. They were always playing on the TV. And people always were tuning in and out of them. Like, we were watching them, and then somebody would pick up a conversation, and then we'd watch them. So I've got a theory that these movies are designed to be only half watched. Like when they're writing and producing them, they know that you're not paying close attention, and that you're going to be talking over parts of it, and you're going to be, you know, wandering in and out of the room or whatever. So yeah, for that big sappy speech at the end, you can just ignore it or talk over it or do something else while it's playing. And if you do that, it'll be fine.